Welcome to Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm, where we trade in personal finance advice for entertaining conversations about money and would like to encourage you to treat negativity like James Harden treats driving to the basket. You just dribble, spin, and then you... Welcome to Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm. It is another beautiful day in the neighborhood here in the Washington, D.C. metro area. Malcolm, what is going on with you, man?
Not a lot, man. I just came back from Dallas.
Okay.
That was pretty fun.
You were in Dallas
last
for what?
Couple of days. I went to a conference, also met with a client.
Okay.
And the most important highlight of my trip, I finally got a chance to visit Jerry's World.
Is that right?
It is so.
You got to do a pilgrimage to our team in Texas.
I got to do the whole tour, the whole shebang,
Okay.
the locker room, on the field, all that kind of stuff. The stadium's been up for like 4 years or something.
That's
it
right.
still has the new car smell to it. It's a little bit strange, but it's like great at the same time. Like that place is beautiful.
I went one time. I went to a game by myself while I was in Texas.
But you weren't by yourself.
Yeah, it was with a whole lot of other people.
You were among 85,000 of your closest friends.
Indeed. And somebody got in a fight. It was like an Eagles game, and the Eagles got blown
Well, they probably
out, so
deserved it.
It was back when Donovan McNabb was playing, so this was a while ago.
Oh, no, this is the new stadium.
Yes. Well, I'm talking about the new stadium. It was like the first year or two.
Okay.
It was like the first year or two.
Yeah, that place is,
It's legit.
Anyway.
Anyway, well, this is Manage Your Damn Money, where we trade in personal finance advice for entertaining conversations about money. We want to preview the conversation at hand for this episode. It's actually very simple. Understanding inflation. What is it? How does it work? What does it mean? We'll talk about that. But as we do on every show, it is now time for headlines. This headline for this episode of Manage Your Damn Money: who is Christian Dawkins and the other questions in the FBI NCAA basketball probe? Malcolm, so this is an interesting story that I didn't know much about. I still don't really know a ton about it, but I pulled a February 2018 story from azcentral.com, which explored an FBI investigation into the possible pain for a top college basketball recruit. What's been reported, an ESPN report said that an Arizona head coach, Sean Miller, was caught on a wiretap by the feds talking with a runner for a sports agent about a $100,000 payment for DeAndre Ayton to play for the Arizona Wildcats, which is like a NCAA college team.
Right.
Miller has promised he will be vindicated, and Ayton's family, the player, has said they are outraged at the allegation. Arizona has been in the crosshairs of the FBI investigation into the NCAA recruiting since it broke in September, and the Wildcats assistant, Emmanuel Book Richardson, was indicted. Authorities accused Richardson of accepting $20,000 in cash bribes in exchange for agreeing to pressure players to retain certain management companies when they turn pro. Richardson has pleaded guilty. So essentially, as we kind of know broadly in the NCAA, when you play a college sport, you can't really make money, and you certainly can't commit to work with this or that company before you get out of college, because you're not supposed to be making or doing things that might turn a profit for you.
Right.
And so this is a whole big problem, because it's like big money permeating in a place where they say big money's not supposed to permeate, even though the whole...
Kind of like our politics.
A little bit. Absolutely. Exactly. Same exact thing. But it's interesting because NCAA is like this weird intersection of, it's supposed to be people and college athletes playing for free.
Right.
But we know that's a lot of people...
Well, not playing for free, though.
Right.
They're considered paid based on
the education,
the dollar value of the education that they receive.
I forgot about that. I don't know
how.
That is the argument.
As we were just talking about off camera not too long ago, the rate that college costs have gone up.
Absolutely.
Some would argue, and usually the some are the students of that same university, would argue that those athletes got away with murder in the sense that I had to pay $20,000, $30,000, $80,000 a year,
right,
in some cases, to go to this school.
Right.
You got to go, quote unquote, free.
Right.
So there's your trade-off.
Right.
So a lot of folks who are their peers, if you would, at the time, are the ones that don't feel sorry for them at all.
That's interesting. I never actually thought about it like that from another student's perspective in terms of what a player might be getting in terms of.
Well, think about it this way: if you were still paying off student loans from going to the exact same school that I did,
right,
and I don't have student loan payments to worry about anymore,
right,
do you feel bad for me then that I am complaining that I didn't get paid for the NCAA getting to use my likeness and selling jerseys and all that kind of stuff?
Not necessarily.
Right. But for everybody else on the outside looking at it just on the basis of, well, you're making $1 billion or more.
Right.
You could afford to spread the love a little
just
bit.
a tiny bit.
Just a tad.
And I think this is where a lot of this comes from. But Malcolm, at what point will like major college sports actually have to begin, to your point, spreading the love across either major revenue producing sports like basketball and football,
right,
or giving some kind of equivalent stipend to.
See, but that's tough though.
It is a slippery slope.
Here's the thing: if you go to a school like, I'll use Duke for example.
Mm-hmm.
Duke has perennial basketball talent. Right. Every year they somehow manage to get the best kids out of every high school to come to Duke to play basketball, right?
Right.
And they're in the top 4 over and over and over.
Mm-hmm.
But their football team is not nearly as good as their basketball team.
No.
So if I am a Duke basketball player,
right,
are you going to now subsidize the football team's take-home pay, if you will, for this scenario, based on the sales from folks coming to watch me play basketball?
Right.
Well, now we have a problem. And then to take it even further than that.
What if you play for the bowling team?
What if you're on the archery team or something obscure like bowling or whatever that, maybe 8 people are in attendance for every match and 6 of them are related to the team.
Right.
Now, do they then get the same share as what I would be able to get as the person who's putting butts in the seats at the football arena or the basketball arena or what have you?
Right. One thing that's interesting, because I think there's definitely an element of an equation that would have to work out for that to work, because all college athletes, especially at major revenue producing schools, should be treated about the same. Like, you shouldn't necessarily get more because you're on the football team than if you play volleyball. Or maybe you should. I don't know.
I'm just playing devil's advocate here, as I like to do.
Right.
I know what the football team, the basketball team, those guys are getting up every day at 5 a.m.
It's a lot of work
to lift weights and run, and then you got study hall after your classes, and then practice, and so is everybody else who plays a college sport going through that same level of commitment, intense, experience? If so, then yes, pay them the same across the board for their efforts. Right. But realistically, not. Right? Like, it probably doesn't take nearly the same amount of attention to detail for one versus the other. So, but I think to your question though about where do we start getting into an area where we can see a case being made for you have to start paying guys or guys and girls, it becomes evident in situations like this, where Arizona's a pretty big program. The head coach was already making somewhere around $1.5 million, and still felt the need to snag a few extra dollars under the table. I am of the opinion that all college coaches in big programs are guilty of this in some way or another. So if you're starting to put the press on one coach in a major school like this, all the other coaches have to now be on heightened alert that we're coming for you next. If I'm them, I'm now advocating to keep myself out of hot water. Let's pay the players. Let's take care of my guys and girls here. So
to the point, it's interesting. When I was at Syracuse, I had a friend, Rosalind, and she had a friend who played football. And it's at Syracuse University, so it was a big school. And she talked about how one of her friends who played football could not accept even, like, it was something really just innocuous in terms of what it was. It was like me handing you a candy bar. Something as, like, harmless as that. He thought about it because he was like, I can't technically accept this because this is quote unquote income. And I just remember sitting there, like, I remembered the moment, and I was just like, that's absurd. Like, his college education doesn't take care of, and we've also
living as a human.
Right. So
Ray Lewis, I remember when I was in high school, we got to go to University of Maryland to hear Ray Lewis speak, right? And so Ray Lewis was talking.
Preacher Ray.
Right. He put his preacher hat on to talk to the football team. So he starts telling this story about when he was in college And at University of Miami, pretty big school.
Yes, indeed.
They have a few dollars.
Yes, indeed.
Ray Lewis is a pretty big deal at a pretty big school. He was wearing the same 2 pairs of jeans and 3 T-shirts for his first 2 years of college.
Wow.
Making a lot of money for the University of Miami.
Wow.
But still wearing the exact same clothes he showed up with on his first day on the campus because they didn't have any money as students because they came from poor neighborhoods and weren't really able to afford much of anything the school didn't provide.
Right.
If Ray Lewis can't afford to, buy a new hoodie and a pair of jeans, then what is everybody else supposed to do who's like the second and the third string talent on those teams that's squeaking by too? So I think it's a broken system. I think it's intentionally broken because, if I don't have to pay my employees, then how much can I then,
What's that sound like? That sounds familiar. Anyway, we want to remind folks that you are listening and watching Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm. We're going to take a quick music break, but before we go, we want to remind you can always listen to past episodes of the show. Just find us on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, and now Spotify, and leave us a review on the platform. That helps us go up in the ratings. If you have questions for us, send it to us, info@manageyourdamnmoney.com, and remember to always follow us on Instagram. Malcolm, what's your handle?
At Malcolm on Money.
And of course, mine is at MYDM1, and that's both on Twitter and the Gram. And also you can catch us on Facebook, facebook.com/Manage Your Damn Money. We're going to take a quick music break. When we come back, the conversation at hand, understanding inflation. This is MYDM with Ben and Malcolm. We will be right back. Welcome back to Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm. Today's conversation at hand on this episode is very simple, just 2 words, Malcolm. Understanding inflation. In the 1930s, you could buy a loaf of bread for 15 cents, a new car for less than $1,000, and an average house for around $5,000. In the 21st century today, all of these things and just about everything else cost a whole lot more. And if you ever wonder why a Happy Meal doesn't cost what it did when you were a kid, you can be sure that inflation has had and continues to have a major effect on how far money goes and makes it an important topic for us to discuss here on Manage Your Damn Money. So Malcolm, you actually wrote this show.
Sure.
And as you normally do, you go to Investopedia.com.
One of my favorite places, yes.
Indeed. And inflation is defined by Investopedia as the following. When inflation surged to double-digit levels in the mid to late 1970s, Americans saw it as the American economy's greatest threat. Since then, public anxiety has abated along with the inflation rate, but people remain fearful of inflation even as tepid levels we've seen in the past few years. Although it's common knowledge that prices go up over time, the general population doesn't understand the forces behind inflation, which is why we're discussing it today. The value of a dollar does not stay constant when there's inflation. The value of a dollar is also observed in terms of purchasing power. So how much can a dollar buy you? And then which is real, tangible goods that your money can buy. And then when inflation rises, your purchasing power falls. So if inflation goes up, your ability to buy goes down. For example, if the inflation rate is 2% annually, then theoretically a $1 pack of gum should cost $1.02 the following year. After inflation, your dollar can't buy the same goods it did before. So we thought in kind of putting this show together, we would come up with a couple of things or pull a couple of things that happen when you have unanticipated inflation.
Right.
So one of them, Malcolm, is creditors lose and debtors gain if the lender does not anticipate inflation correctly.
Which almost never happens. There's a whole team behind deciding how much to charge.
So what does that mean when inflation? What does that mean? Explain that real quickly.
I think one of the easiest examples is probably when you buy a car.
Okay.
So I don't know how often it happens now, but I remember once upon a time, like 2008, 2009, when we were coming out of the economic crisis, you would see car dealers all the time on TV advertising 0% interest for a 5-year loan, 6-year loan on a brand new car.
Right.
That 0% interest rate meant that they were then losing money on you financing the car.
Right.
Because as interest rates stay flat, 0%, and inflation goes up 1 or 2%, that means the value of the dollars you're paying them on an annual basis are worth less than they were when you initially bought the car.
When you did the deal.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Another problem that could come up when there's unanticipated inflation, people living off fixed incomes, such as retirees, they see a decline in their purchasing power, and consequently their standard of living obviously falls. So like if you saved $100,000 for retirement, you might have planned for what $100,000 bought you 10 years ago.
Right.
As it goes forward, as time moves on, you're not able to really meet the expenses, as now your expenses might cost $110,000.
Which is like the scariest part of retiring.
Right.
Is the fact that inflation could completely come in and just erode your savings that way. Yeah.
Right. Another issue with inflation, the entire economy must absorb repricing cost, or what is also referred to as menu cost, as price lists, labels, and menus and more have to be updated. So when the price of your Big Mac goes up, that means McDonald's has to pull down. Well, I guess they do digital menus now, so they can just change it.
Sure. But not everywhere, though.
Right, that's
Some
true.
places probably still do things by hand, but if you think about a restaurant menu,
Absolutely.
how much does it cost me to reprint that menu now? Like, think about a place like Cheesecake Factory that has like 80 pages in their menu. How much does it cost me to reprint every single one of those glossy menus?
Right.
There's, your risk there.
That's a significant cost. And if the inflation rate is greater than that of other countries, domestic products become less competitive, and the domestic currency usually depreciates. So that's another effect of inflation. Inflation can also signify that an economy is growing in some situations. Little inflation or deflation can be just as bad as high inflation. A lack of inflation may be an indication that the economy is weakening. Say that 10 times fast. It's not always easy to label inflation either good or bad. It depends on the overall economy and which side of the coin you're on. So some quick questions for you, Malcolm.
Sure.
What was the first experience that you had or that you can remember with inflation, or your understanding of inflation?
That's a tough one.
Really?
I do remember, though, being a kid and having conversation with my mom about inflation.
Okay.
And I think it had something to do with me buying like Pop-Tarts or something from
You
the
were an
grocery
advanced
store.
child.
Like, well, I've always been this interested in money.
Okay.
It's no coincidence
And
that
you
I
were
landed
wondering
in
why
this
it cost
arena.
more than 2 years ago?
Well, I was wondering why I couldn't buy it anymore like I used to. So I show up at the grocery store with my $1 to buy some Pop-Tarts, and now they cost $1.08, so I can't afford it because I only have $1. Why is that such a thing? I think that's kind of how the conversation happened, if I remember correctly.
That's pretty hilarious. I don't remember a specific instance. I just remember a feeling of every year that I got older, because I've been thinking about money since I was 6 or something. Every year that I got older and that I had money to spend, I would remember what prices were. And I still catch myself doing that.
So you were 6 years old saying, back in my day.
So not at 6, but definitely as a teenager, I would remember this thing that I buy frequently,
Right.
or that I enjoy buying on my own, now cost a little bit more. And now, like a grown-up version, I remember back in the day, like nice Nike tennis shoes like Jordans were $100.
And that was a
big
like, deal.
Yo, $100. Right. My parents never bought
It was like,
me.
how dare you have the audacity to ask me to spend $100 on a pair of shoes?
The highest
now,
my parents.
You see the advertisements, and it's like, how dare you have the audacity to ask me for $250, Michael Jordan?
My parents never bought me shoes that were above 90. 90 was like the highest that I ever got.
Ballin'. Like $90, that's your complaint?
That was petitioning. But
your
now,
complaint is $90? You're talking to a dude who grew up wearing Payless shoes in elementary school and middle school. Okay? So $90 would have been like my whole school shoe budget for the 3 years you're in middle school. So, you know, if you ever wonder why I have the best comebacks at the drop of a hat, you try walking around D.C. with some Payless shoes on as a kid and see how quick you can come up with some jokes.
That's hilarious. And I know for me, now that I see the prices of tennis shoes now, especially the cool ones, I'm like, yo, $200 for – that's inflation. Like, cool tennis shoes when I was a kid was $100.
Michael Jordan is going to have to come deliver those shoes to me himself to get me to pay $250.
Right. A little bit more seriously, though, especially in your line of work as a financial planner.
Sure.
How does inflation impact the way we save or plan for the decades out?
So
like it could change.
Interestingly enough, inflation is like public enemy number one when putting together a financial plan.
Wow. Okay.
It's like the one thing, it's the one place you start.
Right.
And then everything else kind of falls into line. So you've got to assume rates of return on investments, sure, but you've got to first assume rates of inflation to be able to make sure that you over-prepare.
Right.
Because inflation is not something that happens on a standard schedule, right? That's the reason we're having this conversation about it. So it could be 2% in 1 year, 5% the next year, 1% the next year. And you never really know what inflation is going to be until you're looking in your rearview mirror. Right. And you, as the economist, get to write down, okay, in 2017, we had X amount of inflation. So you definitely have to factor that into anything you decide when it comes to developing a financial plan.
In terms of, like let's say if it's somebody's like 30 or 40,
sure,
and they're considering their financial plan ahead, how do people, aside from like picking good investments and doing like the savings, how do people account for the inflation specifically? Like, is it that they, like, one way is you could plan for it in terms of your savings, but another way is like that I can think of off the top of my head is cutting back or planning to cut back, which I'm sure a lot of people do, especially when they're like empty nesters, they cut back on expenses, they get a smaller house. What are things people do to kind of combat inflation from different angles?
Well, fortunately, there's a lot of calculators now that do a lot of that math for you.
Okay.
So if you were to go to bankrate.com, for example, and you wanted to know how much is my home value going to be 20 years from now, if I assume a rate of inflation of 2, 2.5, 3, 5%, whatever you decide to do, you can actually do that online for free now.
Okay.
Where you used to have to actually go to somebody who had a financial calculator and was like the only person in your town who knew how to use it. Now the internet has kind of made those kind of things obsolete. Right. So there's not a lot that you can't find to be able to, determine some inflated rate on your own now, thanks to technology.
Definitely, and understand how much we'll be paying for Nikes in 2040.
When you have kids that come to you and say, "I want Nikes," you know, 10 years down the road, if they're $250 now. With a 2% inflation rate strapped to it, what is that going to be 10 years from now?
Man.
That's an equation that I would just put it in and it would say does not compute.
Malcolm's
there's somebody else's kid at that point.
Malcolm's future children, you are not getting cool Nikes.
Not at all.
Ever. That's cool. Well, we want to remind people you can always listen to past episodes of Manage Your Damn Money on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, and Spotify. Also, remember to leave us a review on those platforms. That helps us go up in the ratings. And also, you can send questions to us. Send them at info@manageyourdamnmoney.com. And you can also follow us on social media. What's your handle, Malcolm?
At Malcolm on Money.
And, of course, mine is at MYDM1. And you can always catch us on Facebook, facebook.com/manageyourdamnmoney. This is MYDM, today's conversation at hand, understanding inflation. We'll take a quick music break. We will be right back. Welcome back to Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm. Today's conversation at hand, understanding inflation. But a real quick reminder, if you have a question for us or you want Malcolm to respond to something for Malcolm's Money Minute, send it to us, info@manageyourdamnmoney.com. As I mentioned before, today's conversation at hand, understanding inflation. There are several kinds of inflation. One is deflation. This is when the general level of prices fall. This is the opposite of inflation. So deflation, inflation. Then there's hyperinflation. This is usually rapid inflation. So in extreme cases, this can lead to the breakdown of a nation's monetary system. And we always hear about that in the news when like developing countries have huge inflation.
Right.
And like a stick of gum costs like 10,000 gaboobly boos. Like that's
I don't know what country uses gaboobly boos, but yes, we get.
That's the concept of hyperinflation, when people walk around with a whole bunch of wads of cash of whatever their currency is.
Right.
And then the last one is stagflation, which is a combination of high unemployment and economic stagnation with inflation. So this sounds like an inflation cocktail, which is just really bad. This happened in industrialized countries during the 1970s when a bad economy was combined with OPEC raising the oil prices.
So we were too young to have to live through this, but because I studied economics and I'm a little bit of a nerd on the weekends, I've like seen so many videos and read so many horror stories about it. So under Carter, apparently people used to have
Carter,
to.
who?
President Carter.
Oh, okay.
People used to have to get up at like 4 a.m. to go sit in line to buy gas at like 8, 9 a.m. before they went to work.
Right.
And so for a period in the 70s, folks were like having to wait 6 hours to pay, 3 times as much as they normally would have for gas because of situations like that.
Right, absolutely. I'm thinking about those grainy pieces of footage that you watch in documentaries of people lying down the street.
Right, with the cars that were 30 feet long in the first place, all waiting to burn up, 40 gallons of gas on your way home and then turn around and do it again in the morning.
Right, that's hilarious. But it's interesting because we don't really talk about this. This is an interesting conversation to have. Here, 7 common expenses that have become more expensive much more quickly than inflation, and this is kind of ties back to us talking about the shoes. An interesting thing about inflation is that all prices, and our wages as well, don't increase at the same rate. And when some expenses are growing at a much faster rate than the overall inflation rate and our overall wage growth, that can cause financial distress. So here are 7 examples of expenses that have been growing more rapidly than inflation. The number one thing, Malcolm, which we were talking about before the show started, college tuition. A college degree is supposed to help you earn more over the course of your working life, but tuition costs have risen so rapidly that student debt has become a big problem for many new graduates. According to College Board data, tuition and fees at a public now 4-year college totaled to about $3,000 for the 1996 through 1997 school year, and jumped 225% to $9,600 for 2016 to 2017 school year. That's a 6.1% average annual gain. So it went from $3,000 a year to
about
$9,600 a year in not long time. So that's incredibly inflated prices there. And then also another one, which is not so apparent, Malcolm, which when I read this, I was like, oh yeah, that is kind of true because I've heard stuff about it. Prescription drugs.
Right.
Which is obviously something that could be, necessary for life for some folks.
So that prescription drug one is a really big challenge when it comes. We were talking before about the challenges that go along with retirement.
Right.
Not knowing what you're going to pay for prescription drugs in the future is a huge fear.
Or how sick you're going to be.
But these drug companies have the ability to get not to get too far into the economics, but this is now what's called an inelastic demand, which means that regardless of what
demand now. Okay, all right.
It means basically no matter what the price of that thing goes up to, you're still going to buy it.
Right.
So it doesn't matter what price they decide to charge, they being the drug companies, you still are a person who's up in age, probably has 1 or 2 prescriptions that you have to take every single day of your life.
Right.
They know they've got you.
Right.
And so now your ability to, demand a certain price for it, not there.
Right.
So
definitely. And some of the statistics here, prescription drugs accounted for nearly 17% of all healthcare spending in 2015. And just in the single year from about mid-2015 to mid-2016, they jumped nearly 10%, while inflation inched ahead by only 1%. So that's like a huge jump ahead of what the dollar cost versus what this good cost. For a longer-term view, consider that per an AARP study, the price for an AARP-selected basket of widely used prescription drugs rose from basically $4,000 in 2005 to $11,000 in 2013, an annual increase of 13.4% and a total jump of 174%. In 2015 alone, it jumped 15.5%, almost 130 times the rate of inflation. So that means that that thing that somebody needed to buy, in this case prescription drugs,
right,
rose much faster than anyone's wages would rise or anyone's retirement income would rise in that same amount of time.
But the formula for the drug stays the same.
Indeed it does. The drug itself doesn't change. Maybe they brand it differently, give it another nice name that they give us commercials with all the warnings about what could happen to you when you take this drug. Then there's gas, Malcolm, which you just made an allusion to. It's true that with gas prices now in the $2 range, $3 sometimes here in D.C., many of us are breathing a bit easier, remembering when prices topped $4. But overall, over the past 20 years, the price of gas in the U.S. has grown at a faster clip than inflation. While inflation averaged 2.1%, gas prices, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, averaged 3.4%, enough to nearly double the cost of gasoline. And I always remember my grandfather talking about paying for like gas for like 25 cents and 35 cents.
I was just thinking that's one of those I remember when scenarios you were talking about earlier.
Definitely.
Because I remember when I was a kid going to school in the morning, I'm thinking like 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, something like that. Mm-hmm. And gas was about 89 cents.
You remember that? I don't remember that.
I remember seeing the signs at 2 specific gas stations on the corners on my way to school. And both of them were 89 cents for a long time.
I don't remember 2-digit gas prices. I remember like $1 maybe, $1 something.
I remember how much it was when we were in high school, too, because the gap made absolutely no sense.
Right,
and
yeah.
Those are the kind of things that I was paying attention to.
Not cartoons, not playing outside. He was paying attention to gas prices on the corner. Also, another one, Malcolm, homes. Right. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, the median U.S. home value was $119,000 in 2000. It rose 96% by the end of 2016 to $235,000, roughly doubling over 17 years. That's an average annual increase of 4.1%, well above the inflation rate. Of course, the United States is a big country, and prices vary from region to region, and rates at which regional prices rise or fall vary too. But that's like a big deal, especially in like major cities like the one we live in. You know, the price of homes and the price of property is going to outpace what people can earn to match that, or what they need to actually match that. This is one that I think is categorized along with the shoes. Like, I've always noticed this.
What's that?
I'm pissed off regularly about it because I'm like, how could this cost this? I went to a matinee recently to see Black Panther.
Matinees still exist?
They still exist, and you can save some money when you go. Movie tickets.
Right.
Over the past 20 years, the price of movie tickets has grown at a faster clip than inflation. Per the folks at boxofficemojo.com, the average movie ticket price in 1997 was $4.59 versus, I want to know where this is, $8.84 today. I will gladly pay $9 to go see a movie.
Do you remember how much movies were when you were in high school?
No, but I know it's gone up.
I remember when I was in 8th grade, it was $9 to go to the movies.
Okay.
$7 for the matinee you're talking about.
All right.
Because I used to go to the movies all the time back then.
Okay.
Now, like you just said,
you got a financial.
2 weeks ago or something, $18.
You need a financial plan to go see these movies.
So what happened from the time that our parents were going to the movies and paying $1 or $4 or whatever, to me paying $9 in 8th grade, to me now paying $20
at night.
At nighttime, like the late movie, the early movie, doesn't matter what time you go. That's why when you said matinee, I was like, I don't know what that is. It's like a 50-cent difference at best.
They phased that out. Actually, I was surprised. We went to a different movie theater than we usually go to, and that's where it was. Okay. And it was $11 as an adult, and I was very shocked and happy about that. Another one that's an interesting one to throw in there, amusement parks. Over the past 20 years, the price of tickets to Walt Disney Resorts has grown at a faster clip than inflation. In 1997, a single one-day ticket for an adult averaged about $39, which is pretty expensive to get into an amusement park.
That's what I thought reading that.
In 97, like that's a. Now I know why we were taking cans to Six Flags to get the discounted rate. And then recently, a one-day park regular season as opposed to peak season adult ticket to Magic Kingdom set you back $110. While inflation averaged 2.1% annually.
I hope they got that authentic reaction to that authentic outrage.
110. You better be all day, and you better be able to be there all day and sleep.
The thing is, I don't remember how much amusement park. Like I can't even be outraged now because by the time I was old enough to have to pay for it myself, I wasn't interested in amusement parks anymore. So I don't even have any base to compare it to. But I do remember the King's Dominion coupons on the Coca-Cola cans.
That is what I'm referring to.
And thinking, who's gonna take that can just to save $2 at the
sir. So I actually went for camp a lot.
Okay.
So it was like that was an activity that always happened during the summer. But that's absurd. Where does it cost $110 to go to an amusement park? That is
you don't
criminal.
see those commercials where they're like a family of 4 can come to Disney for $8,000 for a 5-day stay, and I'm like, man. My kids are never going to see commercials because that right there is outrageous.
That's hilarious. And then finally, the last one, cable TV. According to the Federal Communications Commission, the price of cable TV has been growing far more briskly than inflation.
Can't relate.
Because you don't have cable. Between 1995 and 2015, the price of basic expanded service averaged annual increases of 5.8%, rising from $22 to $69, which sounds about right. The overall average annual inflation rate during those 20 years was only 2.2%. So there's some interesting ways in which inflation hits things that we normally buy or normally want to spend.
Yeah.
And hopefully that helps people understand, like, you kind of have to plan ahead in terms of inflation. Do you think, before we close the show, that inflation is something that people can have to plan for on a day-to-day basis, or is it more just like a decade-to-decade type thing?
Somewhere in between.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's definitely not something you can plan for day to day because the U.S. government can't even properly predict what inflation is going to be enough to save its life right now. Right. Like we've been trying to get inflation off the ground for like 8 years or something, to no avail. So it's impossible, right? But at the same time, you do have to know that it exists and keep it in mind when you're making major life decisions, especially like the price of a home. If I want to buy a house 5 years from now, I've also got to assume that the value or the price of that house is going to go up 2, 3, 5% each year between now and then.
Right.
Or if I want to send my kid to college 10 years from now, well, I've got to assume that the price of that college education at University of Maryland, for example, it's going to move up, proportionately the same way over that 10-year rate and save toward that inflated target, not the today's cost, so that I don't undershoot it, because then I get there and, sorry, kid, you can go to 2.5 years. I don't know what you're going to do the rest of the time, but that's essentially what today's dollars are going to buy you 10 years from now.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, we have yet another great show, thanks to our crew here at Montgomery Community Media for another wonderful show. We want to remind folks that you can always listen to past episodes of Manage Your Damn Money on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, and now Spotify. Of course, always leave us a review, give us a rating so that can help us go up and help more people watch and listen to Manage Your Damn Money.
And we do actually read the reviews to try and help improve this show, too. So
indeed,
don't be shy.
Don't be shy. Don't be shy. And if you have questions or want Malcolm to respond to a question of yours, send it to us, info@manageyourdamnmoney.com. And also, you can follow us on social media on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. What's your handle, Malcolm?
@MalcolmOnMoney.
And of course, mine is @MYDM1. And you can always catch us on Facebook, facebook.com/Manage Your Damn Money. This concludes this show on inflation. Until next time, be good with your money.
Peace.
Peace.